Welcome to Echoes of Dharma. I'm about to tell you something that sounds completely insane, but it might change your life tonight. There's a 73-year-old Buddhist monk in Japan who hasn't spoken to another human in over 20 years. He lives completely alone on a mountain. When scientists studied him, they discovered something shocking. His brain scans looked identical to people who are deeply in love. His happiness levels were off the charts. When they asked if he ever felt lonely, he looked confused and said, "How can I be lonely when I finally met my best friend?" They asked who that was. He pointed to himself. Here's what no one tells you. The loneliness you feel when you're alone isn't caused by being alone. It's caused by running from yourself your entire life. Right now, put your hand on your chest. Feel your heart beat. When was the last time you actually paid attention to the person who's been with you every single second of your life? That person is you, and chances are, you've been treating them like a stranger. Tonight, you'll meet 6 people who discovered something extraordinary, that the very thing our culture teaches us to fear is actually the doorway to unimaginable peace. You're going to feel resistant listening to these stories. Your mind will say, "This doesn't apply to me." When that happens, get curious, because in Zen Buddhism we say, the thing you resist most is pointing directly at your freedom. In the next hour, you'll discover why a millionaire threw away his company to sit in silence, and meet that hermit monk who found his best friend. Most importantly, you'll answer this. What would your life look like if you genuinely enjoyed being alone with yourself? So, settle in and prepare to meet the most important person you'll ever know, the real you. Let's begin. Our first story takes us to the mountains of ancient Japan and to a monastery so remote that most people believed it was just a legend. Here lived Master Dogen, a Zen monk whose reputation for wisdom had spread across the land, though he rarely spoke to anyone. One crisp autumn morning, as golden leaves danced in the mountain air, an expensive carriage pulled up to the monastery gates. Out stepped a man named Takeshi, dressed in the finest silk robes money could buy. He was what we'd call successful today. He owned 3 profitable businesses, had servants attending his every need, and was respected throughout his province. But Takeshi had a problem that his wealth couldn't solve. He was terrified of silence, absolutely terrified. Every room in his mansion had musicians playing constantly. He traveled with an entourage specifically to avoid being alone with his thoughts. Even when he bathed, servants would read to him or tell stories. The idea of sitting quietly, with nothing but his own mind for company, made him break into a cold sweat. When Takeshi found Master Dogen sitting peacefully in the monastery garden, he was struck by something he'd never seen before. Here was a man completely comfortable in his own skin, radiating a kind of contentment that seemed impossible. "Master," Takeshi said, bowing deeply, "I've come because I'm suffering from something I don't understand. I have everything a man could want, yet I feel empty inside. Worse, I'm afraid of my own company. When things get quiet, when I'm alone with my thoughts, I feel like I'm drowning. How do you sit here so peacefully with nothing but silence?" Master Dogen smiled gently and gestured to a simple tea set beside him. Without saying a word, he picked up an ornate cup that Takeshi had brought as a gift, covered in gold and precious stones. Then he picked up his own cup, plain, simple, with a small chip on the rim. "Tell me, Takeshi," the master said, "which cup can hold more tea?" Takeshi looked confused. "Well, they're about the same size, but mine is clearly more valuable. It's decorated with gold, and—" "That's not what I asked," Master Dogen interrupted gently. He began pouring tea into Takeshi's ornate cup, but because it was so covered with decorations inside, the tea barely filled a quarter of the space. Then he poured tea into his simple cup. It filled completely to the brim. "You see," the master said, "your cup is so full of decorations, so cluttered with external beauty, that there's no room for what actually matters. My cup appears empty, plain, even damaged to your eyes. But because it's empty, it can be filled with something real." Takeshi stared at the cups, something clicking in his mind. "Are you saying that my fear of emptiness is exactly what's keeping you empty?" Master Dogen finished. "In Zen, we call this Shoshin, beginner's mind. It means approaching life with the openness of someone who knows nothing, rather than someone who thinks they know everything. Now here's where this gets really profound. In Buddhist teaching, there's a concept called sunyata, often translated as emptiness. But it doesn't mean nothingness. It means being empty of the false things we fill ourselves with, so we can be filled with what's real. Think about your own life right now. How much of your day is spent filling the silence? Scrolling through your phone the moment you feel bored, turning on Netflix the second you get home, playing music or podcasts every time you're in the car. What if all that noise is like the decorations on Takeshi's cup, making you feel full, but actually keeping you empty? Master Dogen continued his teaching. Takeshi, you fear silence because you've never learned to distinguish between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness is feeling empty even when surrounded by people. Solitude is feeling complete when you're by yourself. But how do I learn that? Takeshi asked, his voice almost desperate. The same way you learn to fill every moment with noise. The master replied, practice. But instead of practicing avoidance, you practice presence. Master Dogen stood up and walked to a small pond in the garden. Look at this water, he said. When it's constantly stirred up, you can't see the bottom. But when it's still, he gestured to the perfectly clear water reflecting the sky above. You can see all the way through to the truth beneath. Your mind is like this water, he continued. All your noise, all your distractions, all your fear of silence, they're like constantly stirring the water. You can never see clearly what's really there. This is the core of Buddhist psychology. We suffer not because life is difficult, but because we're constantly running from our own experience. Every time you reach for your phone when you feel uncomfortable, every time you turn on background noise to avoid your thoughts, you're essentially saying, I can't trust myself to be alone with me. But here's what Takeshi was about to discover, and what you can discover too. The person you're running from doesn't actually exist. The scary, uncomfortable, boring person you think you'll find in the silence. That's just a story you've been telling yourself. Master Dogen invited Takeshi to sit with him in silence for just 5 minutes. Don't try to meditate, he said. Don't try to achieve anything. Just sit. And when your mind starts chattering about how uncomfortable this is, just notice that it's chattering. Don't fight it. Don't judge it. Just observe it, like you'd observe clouds passing in the sky. For the first minute, Takeshi's mind was chaos. He thought about his businesses, his servants waiting outside, how weird this felt, how he should be doing something productive. But Master Dogen had told him just to notice, so he did. By the 3rd minute, something strange started happening. The thoughts were still there, but they seemed less urgent, less demanding of his attention. It was like turning down the volume on a radio. The sound was still playing, but it wasn't overwhelming anymore. And in the 5th minute, Takeshi experienced something he hadn't felt since childhood. Genuine peace. Not the artificial calm that comes from having everything arranged perfectly, but a deep, unshakable quietness that seemed to rise from within him. When the 5 minutes ended, Takeshi opened his eyes with tears streaming down his face. "Master," he whispered, "I've been running from the most beautiful part of myself." Master Dogen nodded. "This is what we call your Buddha nature, the peaceful, aware, complete essence that was there all along, waiting for you to stop running long enough to notice it. Now, I want you to pause for a moment and really think about this. When was the last time you gave yourself the gift of 5 minutes of genuine silence? Not sleep, not meditation with an app, not even prayer with words. Just pure, simple presence with yourself? What are you afraid you'll find there? What if, like Takeshi, you discovered that the thing you've been running from your entire life is actually the most beautiful part of who you are? Takeshi left the monastery that day a changed man. He didn't abandon his businesses or become a monk, but he did something revolutionary. He fired his musicians. He started taking walks alone. He began each day with 5 minutes of silence, which gradually became 10, then 20. 6 months later, people in his province started commenting on how different he seemed. More present, more genuine, more at peace. His business relationships improved because he actually listened when people spoke. His health improved because he wasn't constantly stressed. His entire life transformed, not because he added anything to it, but because he finally emptied his cup enough to be filled with what was real. This is the paradox that Buddha taught. To find yourself, you must first lose the false self you think you are. To feel truly full, you must first empty yourself of all the noise you've been using to avoid feeling empty. As we move to our next story, I want to leave you with this question. If you stopped filling every quiet moment with distraction, what do you think you might discover about yourself? What if your fear of being alone is actually your fear of finding out how complete you already are? In our next story, we'll meet a woman who discovered that the simple act of making tea alone became the most profound spiritual practice of her life. But first, take a moment to notice. Right now, in this moment, you are perfectly okay being exactly where you are. That peace you're feeling, that's not coming from this story. That's coming from you. Our next story takes us to a small tea house in Kyoto, nestled between cherry trees that bloomed every spring like nature's own celebration of solitude. Here lived an elderly woman named Sato-san, who had spent the last 30 years perfecting something most people would consider ridiculously simple: making tea for one. But this wasn't just about tea. This was about discovering something revolutionary that most of us have completely forgotten in our rush through life. One rainy April morning, as cherry blossoms fell like pink snow outside her window, a young woman named Yuki knocked frantically on Sato-san's door. Yuki was the kind of person you probably recognize. Maybe you even see her in the mirror. She was constantly busy, always multitasking, her mind jumping from one thing to the next like a monkey swinging through trees. "Please," Yuki said, practically breathless. "Everyone says you can teach peace, but I don't have much time. Can you just give me the quick version? Maybe some techniques I can practice while I'm doing other things?" Sato-san smiled with the kind of patience that comes from truly understanding something. "Of course," she said gently. "Let's have tea first, and then I'll teach you everything you need to know." Yuki checked her phone while following Sato-san into the tea house. "Actually, could we maybe speed this up? I have 17 things on my to-do list today, and I'm already behind." This is where the real teaching began, though Yuki didn't realize it yet. Sato-san began preparing tea with movements so deliberate they seemed almost ceremonial. She heated the water slowly, measured the tea leaves carefully, arranged the cups with precise attention. Every gesture was intentional, unhurried, completely present. Meanwhile, Yuki was fidgeting, checking her phone, thinking about her meetings, planning her grocery list. Her mind was everywhere except where her body was sitting. "This is taking forever," Yuki muttered under her breath. Sato-san heard her and paused. "Yuki-chan," she said softly, "you asked me to teach you peace, but you're not here to learn it." "What do you mean?" "I'm sitting right here." "Your body is here," Sato-san replied. "But where is your mind? In the next meeting? On your phone? Planning tomorrow? You're asking me to teach you presence while you practice absence." This hit Yuki like a gentle slap of awakening. She realized that even in this moment, supposedly seeking peace, she was mentally somewhere else entirely. Sato-san continued her tea preparation, and as she did, she began to teach one of the most profound concepts in Zen Buddhism: Ichigo Ichie. This phrase means one time, one meeting. Sato-san explained as she poured the hot water over the tea leaves. It reminds us that this exact moment, you sitting here, me making tea, the rain falling outside, the cherry blossoms on the ground, will never happen again in exactly this way. She gestured to the steam rising from the teapot. See this steam. Each wisp is unique, unrepeatable. In 10 seconds, it will be gone forever, and new steam will take its place. This moment is like that steam. Miss it while you're thinking about the next moment, and it's gone forever. Now here's what's happening in Buddhist psychology that most people don't understand. Our minds are naturally designed to wander, but somewhere along the way, we started believing that this wandering mind, this constant mental chatter about past and future, is actually who we are. But you are not your thoughts. You are the awareness that notices your thoughts. And when you learn to rest in that awareness, even for a few moments, you discover something extraordinary. The present moment isn't boring or empty. It's alive, rich, full of details you've been missing your entire life. Sato-san finally finished preparing the tea and placed a cup in front of Yuki. "Now," she said, "I want you to drink this tea as if it's the first cup of tea you've ever had in your life, as if you're discovering taste itself for the first time." Yuki looked skeptical. "It's just tea. I drink tea every day." "Exactly the problem." Sato-san smiled. "You think you know what tea is, so you never actually taste it. You're always drinking yesterday's tea or tomorrow's tea, never today's tea." Reluctantly, Yuki lifted the cup to her lips. At first, her mind was still racing. "This is silly. I need to get going. What's the point of this?" But Sato-san's presence was so calm, so completely present, that gradually Yuki found herself slowing down. She noticed the warmth of the cup in her hands, the slight bitterness of the green tea, the way the taste seemed to change as she held it in her mouth, the sound of rain on the roof she hadn't heard before, the soft light filtering through the paper windows. For the first time in years, Yuki was completely present. Not thinking about the past or future, not judging the experience, just here. And in that presence, something magical happened. The restless anxiety that had been her constant companion began to dissolve. Not because anything changed in her external circumstances, but because she stopped resisting the moment she was actually in. "This is what Buddha meant," Sato-san said quietly, when he said that all suffering comes from our inability to be present with what is. You've been suffering not because your life is wrong, but because you're never actually in your life. You're always somewhere else. Think about your own life right now. When was the last time you ate a meal without looking at your phone? When did you last take a shower without planning your day? When did you last walk somewhere without listening to music or podcasts? How much of your life are you actually present for? This isn't about becoming a monk or giving up technology. It's about rediscovering your capacity for what Zen calls just this. Just this breath, just this step, just this cup of tea, just this moment of being alive. Yuki spent the next hour with Sato-san, learning what the teacher called the meditation of ordinary things. Washing the teacups mindfully, sweeping the floor with complete attention, sitting quietly and listening to the rain. Each activity became a doorway into presence. But how do I remember this when I go back to my crazy life? Yuki asked as the lesson ended. Sato-san smiled and handed her a small, simple teacup. Every time you drink tea, remember this moment. Let it be your reminder that you always have a choice. You can rush through your experience, or you can show up for it. You can live your life, or you can think about living your life. The choice is yours, moment by moment. This is the profound teaching hidden in something as simple as drinking tea alone. Presence is not a destination you reach. It's a choice you make, over and over again. And when you choose presence, even the most ordinary moments become sacred. 6 months later, Yuki returned to thank Sato-san. That day changed everything. She said, "I still have a busy life, but now I'm actually living it instead of thinking about it. My tea breaks have become my meditation. My walks have become my church. Even washing dishes has become a practice of presence." Sato-san nodded knowingly. You discovered what the Buddha taught. Heaven is not a place you go to. It's a way of being present with where you already are. As our story ends, I want you to notice something. Right now, as you're listening to these words, you have an opportunity. You can listen while thinking about other things, or you can be completely present with this moment. You can practice what Yuki learned. Feel your breath. Notice the temperature of the air. Be aware of your body resting wherever you are. This is it. This is your life happening right now. Not in the next moment, not when you finish listening to this story, but now. The question Yuki learned to ask herself, and the question I invite you to ask yourself, is this: am I present for my own life, or am I just thinking about it? In our next story, we'll discover how a hermit monk spent 20 years learning the deepest secret of all: how to transform boredom into bliss. But first, perhaps you could try something revolutionary. For the next minute, just be exactly where you are, not trying to get anywhere else, not waiting for the next thing. Just here, just now, just you. Deep in the mountains of Tibet, where the air is so thin that every breath feels sacred, there lived a monk named Myoan, who made a decision that would terrify most people. He chose to spend 20 years completely alone. Not 20 days, not 20 weeks, 20 years. When Myoan first climbed to his cave retreat, he was running from something that plagues millions of people today: the unbearable restlessness of his own mind. He couldn't sit still for 10 minutes without feeling like he was going to crawl out of his skin. Sound familiar? But here's what's extraordinary about Myoan's story. He didn't just survive 20 years of solitude. He discovered that his greatest enemy, boredom itself, became his most profound teacher. Let me take you inside that cave, because what happened there will change how you think about every restless, uncomfortable, boring moment for the rest of your life. The first year was hell. Myoan would sit on his meditation cushion, and within minutes, his mind would start screaming at him. "This is pointless. You're wasting your life. There's nothing happening here. You should be doing something productive." He'd start thinking about the monastery he'd left behind, the conversations he was missing, the meals he could be enjoying, the books he could be reading. His mind became like a wild animal pacing in a cage, desperate for stimulation, for anything to happen. Does this sound like your mind when you try to sit quietly? When you're stuck in traffic without your phone? When you wake up at 3 a.m. and can't get back to sleep? That restless, agitated feeling that says, I need to be doing something, anything other than this? Most people never get past this stage. They feel the discomfort of boredom and immediately reach for their phone, turn on music, call a friend, find something to do. But Myoan couldn't escape. He had committed to staying in that cave, no matter what his mind threw at him. And that's when he discovered something that modern neuroscience is just beginning to understand. Boredom isn't actually a problem to be solved. It's a doorway to be walked through. By the second year, something started to shift. Myoan began to notice that his boredom had layers, like an onion. The surface layer was restlessness and agitation, but underneath that was something else, a kind of raw awareness he'd never experienced before. When he stopped fighting the boredom and just let it be there, he discovered what Zen masters call shikantaza, just sitting. Not sitting to achieve something, not sitting to become enlightened, not sitting to feel better, just sitting for the pure sake of sitting. And in that purposeless sitting, Myoan found the most profound purpose of all. He began to meet himself. Not the busy, productive, always doing version of himself, but the essential self that exists underneath all the activity. Here's what's happening from a Buddhist perspective that will blow your mind. We think boredom is the absence of something interesting, but actually, boredom is the presence of pure awareness without any object. It's your consciousness in its most natural state, before you dress it up with entertainment and distraction. Think about this for a moment. Every time you feel bored and immediately reach for stimulation, you're essentially saying, I can't handle being aware without having something to be aware of. But what if that raw awareness is actually the most precious thing you possess? By his third year, Myoan started experiencing something remarkable. The cave that had felt like a prison began to feel like a palace. Not because anything changed externally, but because he learned to inhabit his own awareness fully. He would spend hours just watching his breath, not as a meditation technique, but as a way of befriending the rhythm of his own existence. He would listen to silence the way most people listen to music, discovering layers and textures and melodies in the absence of sound. The seasons became his entertainment. He would watch winter slowly give way to spring, not through a window, but through subtle changes in the light filtering into his cave. The shift in air temperature, the different sounds of wind and rain. Each season became a movie that lasted 3 months, and he was both the audience and the main character. Now here's where this gets really profound, and where it connects to your life right now. Myoan discovered that what we call boredom is actually our resistance to the present moment. We're not bored because nothing is happening. We're bored because we want something different to be happening. But when you stop wanting the moment to be different, something magical occurs. The moment reveals its hidden richness. Suddenly, the boring becomes fascinating. The nothing happening becomes everything happening. By his 5th year, Myoan was experiencing what can only be described as cosmic entertainment. He would sit and watch his thoughts arise and dissolve like clouds forming and dispersing in the sky. Each thought became interesting not for its content, but for its nature, the way it appeared from nowhere and returned to nowhere. He discovered that his mind was like a vast theatre, and he could choose to be either lost in the drama on stage or comfortably seated in the audience, watching the show with detached fascination. This is what Buddhists call witness consciousness, the part of you that can observe your own experience without getting caught up in it. Let me ask you something that might make you uncomfortable. When was the last time you were genuinely bored? Not distracted, not entertained, not busy, just bored. And you didn't immediately try to fix it? Most people can't remember such a time because we've become addicted to stimulation. But what if your boredom is actually your soul trying to get your attention? What if it's saying, "Hey, remember me? I'm still here underneath all this noise you're making." By his 10th year, Myoan had discovered the secret that hermits throughout history have known. External entertainment is nothing compared to the entertainment of your own consciousness. When you learn to be fascinated by the workings of your own mind, when you discover the comedy and drama and mystery happening inside your own awareness, you never need to be bored again. He would spend entire days just marveling at the fact that he existed. Think about that. You are a conscious being in an infinite universe, aware that you're aware, capable of experiencing joy and wonder and love. How is that not the most fascinating thing imaginable? But here's the part of Myoan's story that changed him forever. And it happened in his 15th year. He realized that all those years, he thought he was learning to be alone. But actually, he was learning that he was never alone. He discovered what mystics call the presence behind presence, the vast, aware, loving consciousness that is the source of all experience. When you're truly present, when you stop resisting what is, you realize you're held by something infinitely larger than your individual self. This is why Buddha taught that separation is an illusion. When you go deep enough into your own solitude, you discover that you're connected to everything that exists. You're not an isolated individual struggling alone in the universe. You're the universe becoming aware of itself through your particular point of view. After 20 years, when Myoan finally emerged from his cave, people expected to see someone who looked worn down by isolation. Instead, they saw someone radiant with an inner light they'd never seen before. He moved with a stillness that was more powerful than any activity. He spoke with a presence that was more compelling than any entertainment. When asked what he had learned in 20 years of solitude, Myoan smiled and said, "I learned that I was never alone, and I was never bored. I was just afraid of my own infinite nature." Here's what I want you to consider as we close this story. What if your next moment of boredom is actually an invitation? An invitation to discover what Myoan discovered, that underneath all your restlessness and need for stimulation is a peace so profound, a fascination so complete that you'll never need external entertainment to feel fulfilled again? The next time you feel that familiar restlessness, that urge to grab your phone or turn on music or find something to do, try this. Just sit with it for 60 seconds. Don't try to fix it or analyze it or make it go away. Just be curious about it. What does boredom actually feel like in your body? What thoughts arise? What happens if you don't act on the urge to escape? You might just discover, like Myoan did, that boredom is actually a doorway to the most interesting thing in the universe. Your own vast, aware, infinitely creative consciousness. In our next story, we'll meet a master gardener who discovered that creation, not consumption, is the key to true satisfaction. But first, notice this. Right now, in this moment, you're not bored. You're perfectly engaged with this story, perfectly present with these words. That engagement, that presence, it's not coming from the story, it's coming from you. You are your own best entertainment. In the courtyard of an ancient Zen temple, where morning mist danced between carefully placed stones, there lived a master gardener named Keisho, who had discovered something that would revolutionize how you think about happiness. For 40 years, Keisho had tended the same small garden completely alone. No assistants, no visitors, no one to admire her work or tell her how beautiful it was. Yet everyone who saw her described the same thing. She radiated a contentment so deep it seemed to glow from within her. One spring morning, as cherry petals fell like nature's confetti, a young man named Hiroshi arrived at the temple gates. He was the kind of person you might recognize from your own reflection, constantly consuming entertainment, consuming information, consuming other people's creativity, always looking for the next thing to fill the growing emptiness inside him. Hiroshi spent his days scrolling through endless videos, binge-watching shows, reading about other people's lives on social media. He was what we might call a professional consumer, always taking in, but never creating anything himself. And despite having access to more entertainment than any generation in history, he felt more empty and restless than ever. "Master Keisho," he said, bowing as she knelt among her flowers, "I've heard you found some secret to happiness. I've tried everything: meditation apps, self-help books, therapy, even expensive retreats. But no matter what I consume, I still feel empty inside. What am I missing?" Keisho looked up from the seedling she was planting, her hands still covered in rich, dark soil. "Tell me, Hiroshi," she said gently, "what did you create today?" "Create?" Hiroshi looked confused. "I'm not creative. I'm not an artist or a writer or anything like that. I'm just a regular person." Keisho smiled and gestured to her garden. "Do you see this flower?" She pointed to a simple daisy that had just bloomed. "Is this flower an artist?" "Well, no, it's just a flower. Yet it creates beauty every day simply by being itself, by expressing its nature. Creation isn't about making masterpieces. Hiroshi, it's about expressing your essence, contributing something of yourself to the world, rather than just taking from it. This is where Keisho began teaching one of the most profound practices in Zen Buddhism: Samyu, work practice. But this isn't just about physical work. It's about the transformative power of creating something with your own hands, your own energy, your own attention. In modern life, Keisho continued, digging her hands deeper into the soil. People have become addicted to consuming other people's creations. You watch other people's stories, listen to other people's music, scroll through other people's photos. But when did you last create something yourself? When did you last feel the satisfaction of bringing something new into existence? Hiroshi thought about this. He honestly couldn't remember the last time he had made something with his own hands. His days were spent passively absorbing content created by others, never contributing anything himself. No wonder he felt empty. "But I don't know how to garden," Hiroshi protested. "I don't know how to make anything beautiful." Keisho handed him a small seedling and a simple clay pot. "Beauty isn't the goal," she said. "Expressing your care is the goal. This little plant doesn't need you to be an expert. It just needs you to pay attention to it, to nurture it, to participate in its growth." As Hiroshi held the tiny plant, something shifted inside him. For the first time in months, he wasn't consuming someone else's creation. He was being asked to create something himself, to take responsibility for something living and growing. Here's what's happening from a Buddhist perspective that most people don't understand. Consumption is a fundamentally passive relationship with life. You're always on the receiving end, always waiting for the next thing to entertain or fulfill you. But creation is an active relationship with existence. You become a participant in the ongoing process of bringing beauty and meaning into the world. Buddha taught that suffering comes from attachment, but there's a deeper teaching here. Suffering comes from believing you're separate from the creative force of the universe. When you create anything, even something simple, you remember that you're not just a passive observer of life. You're an active participant in its unfolding. Keisho spent the morning teaching Hiroshi the basics of planting his seedling. How to prepare the soil, how much water to give, how to position it for the right amount of sunlight. But more importantly, she was teaching him something profound about attention. "Notice how different this feels," she said as Hiroshi carefully watered his plant. "From watching a video about gardening, when you're actually creating, your attention becomes completely engaged. There's no restlessness, no boredom, no sense that you should be somewhere else doing something else." Hiroshi realized she was right. For the past hour, he hadn't once thought about checking his phone, hadn't felt the familiar urge to find something more interesting to occupy his mind. His attention was completely absorbed in this simple act of creation. This is what we call right action in Buddhism, Keisho explained. Action that comes from your authentic nature, rather than from your endless desires for more stimulation. When you create, you're expressing the same creative principle that brought the universe into existence. You're no longer separate from life. You're actively participating in its creativity. Over the following weeks, Hiroshi returned daily to tend his small plant. Each day brought subtle changes: new leaves, stronger roots, tiny signs of growth that filled him with surprising joy. But more than that, he began to understand what Keisho meant about creation versus consumption. When he watched a movie, he felt temporarily entertained, but ultimately empty when it ended. When he tended his plant, he felt genuinely fulfilled, as if he had contributed something meaningful to existence itself. Why does this feel so different? He asked Keisho one morning as they worked side by side in the garden. Because consumption is about getting, she replied, but creation is about giving. When you create, you're offering your energy, your attention, your care to something outside yourself. This naturally dissolves the ego's constant hunger for more, because you're focused on what you can give rather than what you can get. This is the revolutionary insight that changed Hiroshi's life. Happiness doesn't come from consuming more. It comes from creating more. Not creating for fame or money or recognition, but creating for the pure joy of bringing something new into existence. As his plant grew, so did Hiroshi's understanding. He started noticing creation opportunities everywhere. Cooking a meal became a creative act instead of a chore. Writing a letter to a friend became an artistic expression. Even cleaning his apartment became a way of creating order and beauty in his space. "I'm starting to understand," he told Keisho after a month of daily gardening. "When I was always consuming, I felt like I was waiting for life to give me something. But when I create, I feel like I'm giving something to life. It's completely different." Keisho nodded with the satisfaction of a teacher whose student has grasped something essential. Buddha taught that we suffer when we believe we're separate from the flow of existence. Consumption reinforces that separation. You're always on the outside, looking in, wanting what others have created. But creation dissolves separation. When you create, you participate directly in the ongoing miracle of existence. 6 months later, Hiroshi's small plant had grown into a beautiful flowering bush. But more importantly, Hiroshi had grown into someone completely different. Instead of spending his evenings consuming endless entertainment, he spent them creating, tending his expanding garden, writing poetry, learning to cook, building furniture with his hands. "I never understood before," he told Keisho during one of their morning sessions, "why consumption left me feeling so empty. Now I realize it's because I was trying to fill myself from the outside. But fullness comes from expressing what's already inside." Think about your own life for a moment. How much of your time do you spend consuming versus creating? How much of your day is spent taking in other people's ideas, other people's entertainment, other people's creations? And how much time do you spend expressing your own unique essence, contributing something of yourself to the world? What if the emptiness you sometimes feel isn't because you haven't consumed enough, but because you haven't created enough? What if the restlessness, the boredom, the sense that something is missing, is actually your creative spirit trying to get your attention? As our story closes, Keisho offers one final teaching. Remember, Hiroshi, You don't have to create masterpieces. You just have to create a meal prepared with love, a letter written with care, a garden tended with attention. These are all expressions of your Buddha nature, your innate creativity. When you create, you remember who you really are. In our next story, we'll discover how one master learned to transform the harsh voice in his head into his wisest teacher. But first, consider this. What will you create today? Not for anyone else, not for approval or recognition, but for the pure joy of expressing your unique essence in the world. Your creative spirit is waiting. Beside a quiet river in ancient China, where willow trees dipped their branches into slowly moving water, there stood a temple known for one master's extraordinary ability to find peace in the most unlikely place, inside his own mind. Master Hakuin had spent 30 years learning to do something that most people think is impossible. He had befriended the voice in his head. Now, before you think this sounds crazy, let me ask you something. Right now, as you're listening to this story, there's probably another voice running in the background of your mind. Maybe it's commenting on what I'm saying. Maybe it's thinking about something you need to do later. Maybe it's judging whether this is worth your time. That voice, do you consider it a friend or an enemy? For most people, that inner voice is their harshest critic, their most relentless judge, their most exhausting companion. It never stops talking, never stops analyzing, never stops pointing out what's wrong, what could go wrong, or what should be different. One autumn evening, as golden light filtered through the temple windows, a successful merchant named Chen arrived at Master Hakuin's door. Chen was wealthy, respected, accomplished by every external measure, but he was being tortured by something invisible, the constant, brutal commentary of his own thoughts. "Master," Chen said, his voice trembling with exhaustion, "I can't escape my own mind. From the moment I wake up until I finally fall asleep, there's this voice that never stops criticizing me. You're not working hard enough. You're not smart enough. You made a mistake. People are judging you. You're going to fail. I've tried everything to make it stop, but it just gets louder and meaner. How do you find peace when your own mind is your worst enemy?" Master Hakuin listened with the kind of presence that made people feel truly heard. When Chen finished, the master smiled gently and said, "Let's take a walk by the river. I want to introduce you to someone very important." As they walked along the moonlit riverbank, Master Hakuin began his teaching. "Chen, you've been making a fundamental mistake about that voice in your head. You think it's you, but it's not. You think it's in control, but it's not. And most importantly, you think you have to obey it, but you don't." "What do you mean it's not me?" Chen asked, genuinely confused. "It's my thoughts, in my head." Master Hakuin stopped walking and pointed to the river flowing beside them. "Tell me, Chen, are you the river, or are you the bank that observes the river flowing?" Chen stared at the water, something beginning to shift in his understanding. I'm the bank." "Exactly," Master Hakuin smiled. Your thoughts are like the river, constantly flowing, constantly changing, constantly moving. But you, the real you, are like the bank, stable, observing, aware of the flow but not swept away by it. This is where Master Hakuin began teaching one of the most liberating concepts in all of Buddhism: Zazen, seated meditation. But not meditation as most people think of it, not trying to stop thoughts or achieve some special state. Instead, meditation as the practice of remembering who you really are, the awareness that watches thoughts, not the thoughts themselves. In Zen, Master Hakuin continued as they sat on a large stone by the water's edge. We call this observer consciousness. There is the part of you that thinks, and there is the part of you that is aware of thinking. The part that is aware, that's your true nature. That's where your peace lives. Chen looked skeptical. But these thoughts feel so real, so urgent. When my mind tells me I'm failing, it feels like absolute truth. Watch the river again, Master Hakuin instructed. See that piece of driftwood floating by. For a moment, it's right in front of us, very present, very real. But notice, it doesn't stay. It floats past and disappears around the bend. Your thoughts are like that driftwood. They appear, they seem very real and important, but they're just passing through. The mistake is believing they're permanent truths rather than temporary visitors. Here's what's happening from a Buddhist psychology perspective that will transform how you relate to your own mind. Most people are completely identified with their thoughts. When the mind says, "I'm a failure," they believe, "I am a failure." When the mind says something terrible will happen, they live in fear as if it's already happening. But thoughts are just mental events, no different from sounds or sensations. They arise, they exist for a moment, and they pass away. Master Hakuin invited Chen to try a simple experiment. For the next 5 minutes, I want you to sit quietly and just notice your thoughts. Don't try to stop them. Don't judge them. Don't argue with them. Just watch them like you're watching that river flow. See if you can catch the moment when a thought appears and the moment when it disappears. At first, Chen found this almost impossible. His thoughts were so loud, so demanding, that he kept getting pulled into their content. The voice would say, "This is stupid. This won't work. You're wasting your time." And he'd find himself arguing with it, trying to defend the practice. But Master Hakuin's presence was so calm, so patient, that gradually Chen began to understand what the master meant. There was a part of him that could step back and observe even his most intense thoughts, including the thoughts about the thoughts. "I can see them," Chen whispered in amazement after a few minutes. "I can actually see my thoughts appearing and disappearing. It's like watching clouds form and dissolve in the sky." "Now you're beginning to understand," Master Hakuin said with deep satisfaction. "You are not your thoughts. You are the sky in which thoughts appear. The sky is never damaged by the clouds that pass through it. and you are never damaged by the thoughts that pass through your awareness. This is the revolutionary teaching that Buddha discovered under the Bodhi tree. Suffering doesn't come from having difficult thoughts. Suffering comes from believing you are your thoughts, from being swept away by them, from fighting with them or clinging to them. When you learn to rest in the awareness that observes thoughts, you find an unshakable peace that no mental storm can disturb. Over the following weeks, Chen returned each evening to practice with Master Hakuin. Gradually, he began to develop what the Master called friendly detachment from his inner commentary. Instead of treating that critical voice as your enemy, Master Hakuin taught, try treating it like a worried friend. It's usually trying to protect you from something, even if its methods are clumsy. When it says, "You're going to fail," you can acknowledge it. "Thank you for trying to keep me safe. I hear your concern, but I don't need to be afraid right now." This gentle approach transformed Chen's relationship with his mind completely. Instead of being at war with his thoughts, he learned to coexist with them peacefully. The critical voice didn't disappear, but it lost its power to control his emotions and actions. It's like having a radio playing in another room. Chen explained to Master Hakuin after a month of practice. "I can hear it, but I don't have to turn up the volume or pay attention to every song. I can choose what deserves my attention." But the deepest transformation came when Chen discovered something extraordinary about that observer consciousness Master Hakuin had introduced him to. It wasn't just peaceful, it was inherently loving. The awareness that watches your thoughts. Master Hakuin explained during one of their evening sessions, is the same awareness that watches sunsets, that feels compassion for suffering beings, that experiences wonder at the mystery of existence. When you rest in this awareness, you naturally feel connected to all life, because you're touching the consciousness that pervades everything. This is what mystics throughout history have discovered. At the deepest level of awareness, there is no separation between self and other, no isolation, no loneliness. There is only the vast, aware, and loving presence that is the source of all experience. Think about your own relationship with the voice in your head right now. Is it a friend or an enemy? Do you believe everything it tells you? Or have you learned to listen with discernment? More importantly, have you ever noticed the you that is aware of that voice? The spacious, peaceful awareness that can observe even your most turbulent thoughts without being disturbed. After 3 months of practice, Chen had become a different person. Not because his external circumstances had changed, but because he had discovered his true nature, the unshakable awareness that no thought could disturb. "I still have difficult thoughts," he told Master Hakuin during their final session together. "But now I know I'm not my thoughts. I'm the space in which thoughts appear. And that space, that's where my peace lives. That's where I always feel at home, even when I'm alone." Master Hakuin smiled with the deep satisfaction of a teacher whose student had found their way home. Remember, Chen, you are never truly alone. You always have the best possible companion, your own aware, peaceful, loving consciousness. Learn to rest there, and you'll never feel lonely again. As our story concludes, I invite you to experiment with this teaching right now. Notice that there are thoughts happening in your mind, and notice that there's something aware of those thoughts. Can you feel the difference between the thinking and the awareness of thinking? Can you rest, even for a moment, in that peaceful observer consciousness? That awareness, that's not alone. That's not separate. That's your connection to the infinite consciousness that pervades all existence. When you learn to live from that place, solitude becomes not loneliness, but the deepest intimacy with life itself. In our final story, we'll discover how one master learned to celebrate aloneness as the ultimate feast. But first, take a moment to appreciate the miracle of your own awareness, the consciousness that has been your faithful companion every moment of your life, and always will be. On a snowy New Year's Eve in 15th century Japan, while the rest of the world gathered in groups to celebrate, Master Ikkyu sat completely alone in his simple temple room, about to discover something that would redefine celebration itself. Ikkyu was known throughout Japan as an unconventional monk, someone who found profound wisdom in the most unexpected places. Tonight, as snow fell silently outside his window and distant sounds of festivities echoed from the village below, he was preparing for what he called the Feast of Solitude. But this wasn't about deprivation or loneliness. This was about discovering the ultimate abundance, the richness that exists when you stop needing external things to feel complete. As midnight approached, Master Ikkyu arranged a simple meal before him: a bowl of rice, some pickled vegetables, a cup of tea. To anyone watching, it would have seemed like the saddest New Year's celebration imaginable. No friends, no elaborate feast, no music or laughter. Just an old monk sitting alone with the simplest of meals. But Master Ikkyu was about to demonstrate something revolutionary: that true celebration has nothing to do with external circumstances, and everything to do with your relationship with this moment. As he lifted the first spoonful of rice to his mouth, Ikkyu closed his eyes and smiled with genuine delight. He was tasting not just rice, but the earth that grew it, the rain that nourished it, the sun that ripened it, the farmers who harvested it. In that single grain, he could taste the entire universe. This is what Buddha meant when he taught about interdependence, the understanding that nothing exists in isolation. Even in apparent solitude, you are intimately connected to all of life. Your breath mingles with the breath of trees. Your body is made of elements born in ancient stars. Your consciousness is part of the same awareness that animates all existence. But Master Ikkyu's celebration went deeper than philosophical understanding. As he sat with his simple meal, he began to practice what he called appreciation without comparison. Most people, even when they have good things in their lives, can't fully enjoy them because they're always comparing. This meal is nice, but the one at that expensive restaurant was better. This moment is peaceful, but it would be more fun if my friends were here. I'm content, but other people seem happier. This constant comparison is what steals joy from even the most blessed circumstances. But Ikkyu had learned to experience each moment on its own terms, without measuring it against anything else. As he sipped his tea, Ikkyu felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the temperature of the liquid. It was the warmth of complete presence, of being exactly where he was, without wishing to be anywhere else. This is what Zen masters call wabi-sabi, finding perfect beauty in imperfection, complete abundance in simplicity. But the most profound part of Ikkyu's celebration was still to come. As the temple bells rang midnight, marking the beginning of the new year, he did something that would seem impossible to most people. He toasted himself, not in an egotistical way, but with genuine appreciation for his own company. "Here's to you," he said quietly to himself, raising his teacup. "Thank you for being my most faithful companion. Thank you for all the experiences we've shared, all the lessons we've learned, all the growth we've witnessed together." Think about this for a moment. When was the last time you genuinely appreciated your own company? Not just tolerated being alone, but actually felt grateful for the relationship you have with yourself? Most people spend their entire lives with themselves and never develop this basic appreciation. Society teaches us that celebrating alone is somehow sad or wrong. We're told that joy requires sharing, that meaning comes from external validation, that a life worth living must be witnessed by others. But Master Ikkyu discovered something radical. The deepest celebrations happen in the privacy of your own heart. As the night deepened, Ikkyu began what he called his gratitude inventory. But this wasn't just listing things he was thankful for. It was appreciating aspects of existence that most people take completely for granted. He felt grateful for his ability to taste, to see, to think, to feel emotions. He appreciated the miracle of consciousness itself, the inexplicable fact that the universe had somehow organized itself into awareness. He marveled at his capacity for love, for wonder, for finding meaning in the simplest experiences. This is what happens when you stop looking outside yourself for reasons to celebrate. You discover that existence itself is the ultimate gift. You don't need achievements or acquisitions or applause to justify joy. The simple fact that you are alive, aware, and capable of experiencing this moment is cause for profound celebration. But Ikkyu's feast of solitude had one more element that transformed it from mere contentment into genuine bliss. He celebrated his freedom. Sitting alone in his simple room, he realized he was completely free to be exactly who he was. No one to impress, no roles to play, no expectations to meet. He could think any thought, feel any feeling, express any aspect of his nature without judgment or constraint. This freedom, he realized, was the most precious gift imaginable. How often do you experience this kind of complete freedom? Even when you're with people you love, there's usually some level of performance, some editing of your natural responses to maintain social harmony. But in solitude, you can be utterly, authentically yourself. This isn't loneliness. This is liberation. As dawn broke on the new year, Master Ikkyu felt more nourished than if he had attended the grandest feast. He had discovered what he called the ultimate abundance, the inexhaustible richness of a heart that doesn't need external things to feel full. Years later, when students would ask him about the secret to happiness, Ikkyu would tell them about that New Year's Eve. "I learned that celebration is not about what happens to you," he would say. "It's about your capacity to find joy in whatever is present. And the greatest joy comes from celebrating the miracle of your own existence." This teaching goes to the heart of Buddhist wisdom about contentment. Buddha taught that suffering comes from constantly seeking happiness in external conditions. But true contentment comes from recognizing that you already have everything you need for joy: consciousness, breath, the capacity for awareness and appreciation. Ikkyu's Feast of Solitude became legendary among Zen students, not because it was austere, but because it was abundant. He had discovered how to throw a celebration that never ended, because it didn't depend on external circumstances. Every meal became a feast when eaten with complete presence. Every moment became a celebration when experienced with full appreciation. As our story draws to a close, I want to invite you to consider something radical. What if your next moment alone, whether it's 5 minutes or 5 hours, could be your own feast of solitude? What if instead of trying to fill that time with distraction, you used it to celebrate the extraordinary fact of your own existence? Right now, you have everything Master Ikkyu had: consciousness, the ability to appreciate, the freedom to be exactly who you are. You don't need permission from anyone else to feel grateful for your own life. You don't need external validation to find your existence meaningful. The feast is always available. The celebration is always now. The question Ikkyu's story leaves us with is this: will you wait for the perfect external circumstances to celebrate your life? Or will you discover the ultimate abundance that's available in this very moment? Exactly as you are, exactly where you are? In our final reflection, we'll gather all these teachings together and discover how they transform not just your relationship with solitude, but your entire approach to being alive. But first, perhaps you could try something revolutionary. Thank yourself for being your own most faithful companion. Your relationship with yourself is the longest relationship you'll ever have. It might be time to start celebrating it. As our journey through these ancient teachings comes to a close, let's gather together the profound wisdom we've discovered tonight. From Master Dogen, we learned that emptiness isn't something to fear. It's the very condition that allows us to be filled with what's real. Your beginner's mind, clear of distractions, can hold infinite possibilities. From Sato-san's tea ceremony, we discovered that presence transforms even the simplest moments into sacred experiences. You don't need extraordinary circumstances to touch the extraordinary. You just need to show up fully for ordinary life. Myoan the hermit taught us that boredom is actually a doorway to pure awareness, and that what we call nothing happening might be everything happening, if we have eyes to see it. Master Keisho showed us that creation, not consumption, fills the soul. When you express your unique essence in the world, you remember your connection to the creative force of existence itself. From Master Hakuin, we learned that you are not your thoughts. You are the vast, peaceful awareness in which thoughts arise. That awareness is never lonely because it's your connection to all consciousness. And Master Ikkyu revealed the ultimate secret. You can celebrate your existence without needing anything outside yourself to justify that celebration. Your life is feast enough. Here's the beautiful paradox these masters discovered. The more comfortable you become with solitude, the more connected you feel to all of life. When you stop running from yourself, you discover that the self you were running from was just an illusion. What you find instead is your Buddha nature, the peaceful, aware, inherently complete essence that was never actually alone. Buddha's final teaching to his disciples was this: be a lamp unto yourself. Don't wait for others to illuminate your path. Don't depend on external circumstances to give your life meaning. You have everything you need for peace, for joy, for deep fulfillment, right within your own awareness. So, here's my invitation to you as you drift towards sleep. Tomorrow, when you wake up, try spending just 5 minutes in genuine solitude. Not distracted solitude, not anxious solitude, but conscious, appreciative solitude. See if you can remember what these masters discovered, that you are never truly alone because you carry within you the same consciousness that animates all existence. Your solitude isn't emptiness. It's fullness waiting to be recognized. Your aloneness isn't separation. It's your most intimate connection with life itself. May you rest peacefully tonight, held by the understanding that you are complete exactly as you are. May you wake tomorrow with curiosity about the beautiful person you've been avoiding, yourself, and may you discover, as these masters did, that the greatest love story of your life is the one between you and your own Buddha nature. Sleep well, knowing you are never alone. You are consciousness itself, temporarily wearing a human form, experiencing the miracle of existence. That's not loneliness. That's the greatest celebration of all.